We're going to do our own introductions. Our original moderator is Brian Mallow, the science comedian, and he is tied up in another event. So we're going to kind of wing this and get to your questions almost as soon as humanly possible. I'm Scott Sigler, and I have written Infected, Contagious, Ancestor, and Nocturnal, which will be out in April. And then those are hard science horror thrillers. And then I also write a line of young adult books called the Galactic Football League series, which is a pro football league 700 years in the future with aliens playing different positions based on their physiology. So that's quite a lot of fun. Stand up for just a second here. We actually have somebody who came in team gear wearing the logo of the team. So.
And now that you've mortified your fans. I'm Mira Grant. In keeping with Scott's established how many adjectives can we stick on a book, I write science fiction medical thrillers. Which is to say that I go far too deeply into the science and the biology to make anyone happy. My upcoming series is about parasites, which gives you an idea of how pleasant it is to spend dinner with me. Paul Cornell's wife learned this firsthand at a sushi restaurant in Australia. In my defense, it was her fault.
I must write science fiction apocalyptic thrillers, which is funny because I'm a happy, energetic guy. I've got a beautiful wife, 2 gorgeous, healthy, intelligent children, and I seem to just keep blowing things up on a very large scale again and again. I'm probably best known for the Plague Year trilogy, which is, nanotech run amok. Just finished. It's kind of hard to. It's like my 4th solo novel, and starting into that book, I realized I was blowing up the world, but in a different way, without nanotech. High body count, the civilization is devastated, and I'm like, what is my problem? But it's a lot of fun to blow things up, and I get to learn stuff while I'm doing it.
Yeah.
So we're going to talk about the use of science in science fiction. Is everybody here nerdy enough to know the debate, is Star Wars actually science fiction or is it fantasy? Anybody? Anybody? Okay, a couple people. Well,
and Frost is going to help us.
We're going to. It's. The cat's great. The cat's great. The concept being using actual science in your science fiction, or just saying, throwing out the word, for example, it's nanotech, and then all crazy kinds of things are possible. Or do you actually go in and show how nanotech actually works, perhaps reference what's going on in the modern day and where that could go. So that's the gist of what we're going for here. We've got a couple of talking points I'm going to walk us through, and then we're going to go to everybody's questions. We'll answer whatever questions you may have. The first thing we have, and I'm pretending to moderate, but Jeff wrote these.
I'm the brains behind the operation.
This is a question I get a lot from my fans, is how much research do we do as opposed to how much do we just flat out make things up? So we'll start with you on that. How much research goes into your book as opposed to just saying, well, science isn't where I want it to go for the story, so I'll just wing it?
Which you do you mean?
You.
Okay.
Yes.
I spent approximately 2 years auditing virology courses, toured 6 CDC establishments, got 8 optional vaccinations, and logged several hundred phone hours with the CDC. So I do a lot of research, largely because on my planet, which is a strange planet and not like your Earth planets, I have to build the science completely. I have to have a 100% solid house of science. And then I can start knocking out walls. You never need to see the back half of that house.
When you say build science, you mean build a future state level of science, or are you talking about creating a structure based on today's current
Creating
knowledge?
a structure based on today's current knowledge. My first series, which is the Newsflash trilogy, is really, really based on messed up genetically engineered virology, which is why I spent so much time with the Centers for Disease Control. And there was literally about a 6-month period where I was calling one of my contacts and going, okay, if I took measles up to the virulence until it hit a 73% infection rate with an R0 of 18, and would just go through this lengthy thing and finish it with, would it raise the dead? And he'd say no, and I'd hang up and come back in a week.
Try again.
Until I finally hit the combination where he said, don't do that. And I went, yay, zombie apocalypse time. I think that if I'm going to get really, really outlandish, and some of the things I do are really, really outlandish, I have to have built such a solid foundation with things that I can show you work. Here's measles, here's a measles vaccination. Here's smallpox, here's a smallpox vaccination. Ergo, here's genetically engineered Marburg, and here's how that vaccination would work. By the way, we based it off of rabies. Sorry about that. once the science gets too fringe, once the science loses that foundation, you start getting a lot more unsteadiness. You start getting a lot more questioning. So I think that the more out there my science gets, the more research I have to do. After the second book in the series came out, fully half of the emails I've received have required me to explain brain map imaging as performed in rhesus monkeys, because people don't trust the science.
Well, I grew up reading a lot of just space opera or epic fantasy and stuff where they were clearly just making everything up. And I find that enjoyable and fun, but as I grew older and perhaps more jaded, I found the books and the stories that were really holding me were the stuff that was based on reality. My watchwords these days when I'm writing are plausible but outlandish. I'm always trying to, push things to limit. We can talk about that in a second too. But I try and do as much research as I can, and one of the things that I found is, that's one of the joys of my job, is that I get to learn a lot of very interesting and often kind of disturbing stuff. But it's kind of like being in an endless university. I get to learn these things, play with them for a year or two, and then kind of jettison them and move on to other stuff. Not to say that I haven't used some research for more than one story, but for me, one of the joys, again, is reaching out to these experts and these installations, facilities, and bothering them with lots of questions that they're surprisingly willing to answer. And it's a fascinating time to be alive. There's just so much, it's just in every field that you can think about, making all kinds of headway. So you get to soak all this stuff up, kind of process it, and then I have to sound like I know what I'm talking about, which is the next challenge.
I've found that, I'm sure you guys have found this too, that scientists are remarkably open to anyone who wants information, because it's difficult for a lot of them to even watch pop culture TV shows or movies or read a lot of books, because they look at it and now of course there's not monsters popping out of their test tubes in their lab, so they know it's a fiction story, but they look at it and they go, you couldn't even try to at least get it in a ballpark of right? It's on Wikipedia, it's right here. and they get frustrated by that. So when authors reach out, scientists go, I want to try and get this as close to realistic as I can and still tell a good story. They're amazingly open to that. As far as my books, I have, it's kind of a combination, perhaps. I try and get as much research as I can into a concept to hammer out a plot structure, and then I will take that outline, give it to the scientists, who will then start to tear it apart and say, well, you've got 75% of this right, 25% of this is, you just haven't read enough, or maybe you didn't pay attention in science class. Sometimes I get that one too. But with mine, I'm writing thriller stories. So, and this will spin back to a question back to you. I'm writing thriller stories first. So with me, it's the plot, it's the pacing, and the science is there to support that and to create a very plausible first part of the book. My job is to have you read through probably the first 100, 120 pages, and you're checking it off and go, I know that, I've read about that, I know this, I know that. Kind of get you to buy in with me, and then as we start to take things off the rails and to make it a thriller story, you're along for the ride. And that brings me back to what you were saying. With as much science research as you do, are you creating a plot? I want to tell this story, and then you go out and find research to fit it, no matter how long it takes to find that research? Or do you come up with a plot, and then as the research comes up, you go, well, I kind of have to tell a story, so I'm going to let the science carry me wherever I want to go?
It's really a combination. It depends very much on the story. For the most part, I actually try to avoid the initial apocalypse. I'm very fond of doing the aftermath of apocalypse for the science conundrum. There's a fantastic movie came out earlier this year called Contagion. Absolutely loved it. It's the romantic comedy of the season. It has no plot, because a virus has no plot. A virus is just here to kill you. Now, how that world cleans itself up after the sheer level of die-off that happens over the course of the movie, that's the plot. So what I'll do for my research is I plot out Contagion. My research phase is, let's enjoy destroying mankind. No one will ever see this but me, so I can kill everyone, yay! And then the plot can build off the science and go where it needs to go.
So you create a backstory of a scientifically realistic way for apocalypse to hit, and then pick up the story after there.
Generally, yeah.
Okay. It's almost like building a foundation of a house and nobody else to see it, but you know how it all works. It brings it together.
Exactly. And people are surprisingly open to seeing it once they have committed to the post-apocalypse story. They really want to see how it all went wrong. And then I can just wallow in science until my head explodes.
And Jeff, do you find when you're doing your research, does it take the stories in different directions? Or do you go out like a shopping list? I need this. I need the virus to do this. I need the virus to do this. And on page 72, it's got to do this, and find a way to make that happen.
Very much so. I was going to be the former option of the two that you threw out, where I go out and I try and find the research that I want, you know, and try and bend things around. I want to have those examples and the real world data that I can use. I was very lucky about 2 years ago. The house next door to ours was for sale, and who should move in but a computational biologist who works at Lawrence Berkeley. And so, I mean, you know, it was a sign from God. And so I went over and, you know, we introduced ourselves. I'm like, hey, welcome to the neighborhood. How you doing, buddy? And I mean, someone else in the neighborhood had told me what he did. And so I told him, I said, well, I'm working on this book that has to do with some, you know, genetics. And I kind of, you know, laid out what I want to do. And he stopped me and he said, whoa, Jeff. He said, genetics is so 1995. And I'm like, oh, you know. I'm like, well, what are you doing now? And he said, it's all about proteomics now. And I'm like, what the heck is that? and so, you know, I bought him lunch several times, or, you know, come over with, you know, snacks or whatever, and an iced tea, and we'll just sit on his back patio and just talk. And this guy's like a platinum mine. I mean, it's just amazing.
Yep.
And now I'm harassing him. I've moved on from that project, and I'm harassing him with other stuff. I'm like, look, I need like an alien life form that, you know, has like concentrated oxygen in its blood. And how would I do that? Can I just increase the blood pressure? And he's like, no. He's like, you know, you would take the hemoglobin and you would put a little twist in the protein so that it could adhere to, I don't know, extra oxygen molecules, you know, in the expanded surface area. And I'm like scribbling this down as fast as I possibly can.
Yeah.
You know, and I'll draft it out and I'll send it back to him. And this guy will read through this stuff and say, well, you got this. You know, you missed the you know, the amino acids here. I'm like, okay, great. It's like, and he's doing this all essentially for free, just because he's excited about what he's doing. And then, like, I'm one of the few people that wants to talk to him about what he's doing, because, you know, his wife is like, please, just stop. I don't want to hear about, you know, the protein chains anymore, and I'm just eating it up, so.
Coming up your place.
Yeah, you will.
My science consultants get nerdy and geeky is the only way to phrase it. They have their regular pattern of things that they do every day, and they've got their projects that they've been working on for months. And then somebody comes out of nowhere and says, you know what, tell me how to scientifically melt a face. I want faces to melt. And they're like, and all of a sudden they're like kids in a candy store. It's awesome. These are like PhDs who are very serious about what they do. Very nice, but very serious. And all of a sudden they're given the keys to the candy store, and they just go nuts with it. So it's a ton of fun.